In the shadow of a mountain that no map has ever properly named, there's a forest where the trees grow too close together. Not just close, impossibly close. Their trunks twist around each other like lovers or enemies, depending on who's looking. The locals avoid it after sunset, most avoid it entirely. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. They say there's a house at the center of this forest, a house that wasn't built but grew, sprouting from the earth like the trees themselves. Its windows look like eyes, and sometimes, if you're unlucky enough to glimpse it through the dense foliage, those eyes will find you. This is the story of the 5 people who found themselves drawn to that house, pulled by threads of fate they didn't understand. 5 strangers bound by an ancient promise they didn't make. 5 lives about to become entangled with something that has waited in silence for centuries. This is the story of the Forgotten Keepers. Eliza Morgan had always felt the trees watching her. Even as a child, she would wake in the night, certain that something was pressing against her bedroom window, peering in with curious, ancient eyes. By morning, there would be nothing there but the maple that had stood in her yard for generations, its branches swaying innocently in the breeze. At 32, Eliza had mostly convinced herself these were just the lingering effects of an overactive childhood imagination. She had built a sensible life in the city, far from the rural town where she was raised. She had a sensible job editing technical manuals, a sensible apartment with minimalist furniture, and sensible friends who never spoke about feeling watched by trees. But on the morning of the autumn equinox, Eliza woke to find a leaf pressed against her 7th-floor window. A perfect maple leaf, blood red and impossibly large, its edges curling against the glass as if trying to find a way in. There was no tree outside her window, no ledge where someone might have placed it, just the leaf suspended in midair, waiting. When she approached the window, the leaf detached itself and began to fall. Without thinking, Eliza grabbed her coat and raced downstairs, following its descent. By the time she reached the street, the leaf was nowhere to be seen, but a trail of similar leaves stretched down the sidewalk, leading away from her building. Eliza followed, telling herself this was ridiculous, that leaves didn't leave trails, that she should turn around and go back inside. But her feet kept moving, and the leaves kept appearing one after another, always just ahead, always just out of reach. The trail led her to the train station, where a ticket was waiting at the unmanned kiosk, printed with her name and a destination. She'd never heard of Blackwood Hollow. Miles away, Dr. Theo Park sat in his university office, surrounded by stacks of ancient texts. His specialty was dendrochronology, the study of tree rings and what they could tell us about climate history. At least, that's what his department website said. In reality, Theo had spent the last decade searching for something else in those concentric circles. Messages. It had started with an anomaly in a cross-section of an ancient oak, rings that formed perfect letters in a language no one had spoken. For thousands of years, his colleagues had dismissed it as pareidolia, the human tendency to see patterns where none exist. But then Theo found it again, and again, always the same message: remember your promise. He'd been laughed out of academia, reduced to teaching intro classes while pursuing his research in secret. But today was different. Today, the cross-section on his desk, taken from a tree that had fallen just last week during a lightning storm, contained new words. The house awaits. Blackwood Hollow. When Theo looked up, a red maple leaf was pressed against his window. He stood slowly, hands shaking, as he reached for his worn leather satchel. Sofia Carrera hadn't slept in 3 days. The dreams had become too intense, too real. dreams of roots growing through her bedroom floor, wrapping around her ankles, pulling her down into the earth. Dreams of a house with windows like eyes, watching her, waiting, as one of the city's top botanists. Sophia understood plants better than most people understood their own families. She knew their languages, their desires, their defenses, but nothing in her extensive education had prepared her for plants that reached out from her dreams into reality. It had started with the moss. She'd woken one morning to find it growing between her toes, soft and green against her skin. She'd scrubbed it away, blaming stress and poor hygiene. But it returned the next night, creeping up her ankles. And with it came the whispers, words formed by the rustling of leaves that weren't there. Today, Sophia sat in her laboratory, examining a specimen under the microscope, a piece of the moss she'd finally managed to collect. Its cell structure was unlike anything she'd ever seen, not native to this continent, not native to this world, a voice in the back of her mind suggested. When she looked up from the microscope, a red maple leaf was stuck to her computer screen, and beneath it, her search engine had opened to a train schedule, a train to Blackwood Hollow, departing in 2 hours. Sophia closed her eyes, took a deep breath, and for the first time in her life, decided to follow where the plants were leading. River Chen had always been able to see things others couldn't. As a child, they'd been diagnosed with everything from overactive imagination to schizophrenia, but River knew the truth. The world was full of spirits, energies, entities that existed alongside humanity, usually unnoticed. River had built a life around this ability, working as a spiritual consultant for the desperate and the curious. Most of their clients wanted to contact deceased loved ones or find lost objects. River helped where they could, though they knew most people weren't ready for the full truth of what existed beyond the veil. Lately, River had been dreaming of trees. Not spirits of trees, but the trees themselves, communicating directly, an occurrence so rare that in all their 30 years of sensitivity, they'd never experienced it. The trees showed River images of a house, a forest, and 4 other people whose faces were obscured by shadows. This morning, River had woken to find their entire apartment filled with fallen leaves, red maple leaves covering every surface, crackling beneath their feet as they moved from bedroom to kitchen. In the center of the kitchen table lay a train ticket to Blackwood Hollow, scheduled to depart that afternoon. River packed a small bag with essentials, crystals for protection, herbs for clarity, and a journal to record whatever they were about to experience. As they locked their apartment door, a single leaf floated down from nowhere, landing at their feet. River picked it up and pressed it between the pages of their journal. "I hear you," they whispered. "I'm coming." Gabriel Morgan, no relation to Eliza that he knew of, was the only one of the 5 who already lived in Blackwood Hollow. He'd moved to the small town 3 years ago, after inheriting his grandmother's cottage on the edge of the unnamed forest. It was meant to be temporary, just long enough to renovate the place and sell it. But something about the forest had kept him there. Gabe worked as the town's handyman, fixing leaky pipes and creaky floors for the locals who all seemed strangely accepting of his status as an outsider. No one asked why he stayed. No one mentioned the nights he spent at the forest's edge, watching the distant shadows move between the trees. His grandmother's journals, discovered in the attic of the cottage, spoke of the forest and something called the keeping. The entries grew more cryptic over time, ending abruptly with a warning. They will come when the forest needs them. 5 guardians, 5 keys. Do not let them find the house. This morning, Gabe had woken to find red maple leaves covering his bed. When he'd brushed them aside, they'd revealed a map drawn in what looked like sap, a path leading deep into the forest to a location his grandmother's journals had mentioned many times. The house at the center. As Gabe studied the map, his phone chimed with notifications. The train station manager, a drinking buddy, had texted to let him know there were 4 passengers arriving today, all with tickets to Blackwood Hollow, a town that rarely saw visitors. Something was happening. The forest was calling its guardians. The train station in Blackwood Hollow was little more than a platform with a small shelter. When Eliza stepped off the train, the air felt different, heavier, charged with something she couldn't name. The platform was empty except for 3 other passengers who had disembarked with her: a middle-aged man with glasses and a leather satchel, a young woman in a lab coat, and a person with colourful hair and multiple crystal necklaces. They all stood awkwardly, looking around as if waiting for instructions. Eliza noticed that each of them held a red maple leaf, just like the one that had led her here. "Blackwood Hollow welcomes you," came a voice from behind them. They turned to see a man in his 30s, with work-worn hands and eyes that seemed to reflect the forest visible behind the station. "I'm Gabriel Morgan. I think we need to talk." "Morgan?" Eliza said, stepping forward. "That's my last name too." Gabriel's eyes widened slightly. "Interesting. Very interesting." He looked at the others. "And you would be. Dr. Theo Park," said the man with the satchel, extending his hand. "I study trees." Sophia Carrera, the woman in the lab coat, offered. "Botanist." "River Chen," said the person with the crystals. "I communicate with things most people can't see or hear." Gabriel nodded, unsurprised. "And you?" he asked, turning to Eliza. "Eliza Morgan. I edit technical manuals." It sounded so mundane compared to the others. "And I've always felt like trees were watching me. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time. So if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story." A look of recognition passed over Gabriel's face. "Follow me," he said. "My grandmother left journals about this day, about all of you." As they walked through the small town, locals stopped to stare. Eliza noticed how they kept their distance, how some made subtle gestures with their hands, warding signs, she realized. Gabriel led them to a cottage on the forest's edge. Inside, the walls were covered with maps, drawings of trees and pages, torn from journals and pinned up like evidence in a detective's investigation. "My grandmother was the last keeper," Gabriel explained, gesturing for them to sit at a large wooden table. "Before she died, she told me others would come when the forest needed them. I think that's you." "Keeper of what?" Theo asked, leaning forward with academic interest. "The forest has a heart," Gabriel said. "A house at its center where something is contained. My grandmother called it the keeping. She said it was a pact made centuries ago between the first settlers and the forest itself." "The house with eyes," Sophia whispered. "I've dreamed about it." "We all have," River said, looking around the table. "That's why we're here." Gabriel nodded, then reached for a dusty box on a nearby shelf. From it, he removed 5 objects. A key made of what appeared to be polished wood, a compass with a needle that didn't point north, a small glass vial containing soil, a knife with intricate carvings on the handle, and a book bound in what looked disturbingly like bark. "These belong to the last 5 keepers," he explained. "My grandmother was one. The others died or left over the years. The forest has been restless since, growing denser, watching more intently." "And what exactly do keepers do?" Eliza asked, eyeing the objects warily. "They keep the balance," Gabriel said, "between our world and what lives in the house. Every equinox and solstice they would go to the house and perform a ritual of renewal." "What happens if this ritual isn't performed?" Theo asked. Gabriel's expression darkened. "The forest begins to expand, to reach out. You've all felt it, the leaves, the dreams, the moss." He looked at Sophia, who nodded in confirmation. "That's just the beginning. Eventually, the forest will reclaim what it considers its own." "Which is what?" Eliza pressed. "Everything," Gabriel said simply. Today is the autumn equinox. The forest is calling new keepers because the ritual must be performed. Tonight. A heavy silence fell over the room. Eliza looked at the faces around her, strangers connected by something ancient and inexplicable. Part of her wanted to get back on the train and return to her sensible life. But a deeper part recognized the truth in Gabriel's words. She'd been feeling the forest's pull her entire life. So we go to this house, River said, breaking the silence. We perform the ritual. Then what? Then you're bound to the keeping, Gabriel said. You become keepers. For how long? Sophia asked. Until the forest releases you, Gabriel replied. Or until you die? Another silence, heavier than the first. Do we have a choice? Eliza finally asked. Gabriel met her eyes. The forest chose you. It's been reaching for you your whole lives. You can leave, try to forget, but it will keep reaching, keep pulling, and eventually it will take what it wants. Theo stood abruptly, pacing the small room. This is insane. Trees don't choose people. Forests don't have consciousness. There's a scientific explanation for all of this. Maybe, Gabriel conceded, but will finding that explanation stop what's happening? As if in answer, the cottage creaked around them. Eliza watched in horror as tiny roots began to push through the floorboards, reaching up like fingers. Sophia gasped, backing away. Just like in my dreams. The forest is impatient, Gabriel said calmly, though his eyes betrayed his fear. It knows the sun will set soon. River reached for the objects on the table, hands hovering over them. These are conduits, they said, connections between the keepers and the forest. Yes, Gabriel confirmed, each keeper carries one. How do we know which is ours? Eliza asked. You'll know, Gabriel said. Hesitantly, Eliza reached out. Her hand passed over the compass and the vial without reaction, but when she touched the wooden key, a warmth spread up her arm. The key seemed to vibrate slightly, and for a brief moment, Eliza saw flashes of a woman who had held it before. A woman with her eyes, her jawline. A predecessor, Gabriel explained, noting her expression. The forest remembers all its keepers. One by one, the others found their objects. Theo took the book, its bark cover rippling beneath his fingers. Sophia claimed the vial of soil, which began to glow faintly when she touched it. River connected with the compass, whose needles spun wildly before settling on a direction that pointed directly into the forest. And this, Gabriel said, picking up the knife, has been waiting for me, it seems. As each person held their object, the roots retreated back into the floorboards, leaving no trace of their intrusion. The forest is satisfied for now, Gabriel said. But we need to reach the house before sunset. And if we don't? Sophia asked. The boundary weakens at the equinox, Gabriel explained. What's kept in the house could find a way out. What exactly is in there? Theo demanded. Gabriel hesitated. My grandmother's journals aren't clear. They refer to it only as the first growth, something that was here long before humans, something that taught the forest to think, to remember, to want. And we're supposed to keep it contained? Eliza asked incredulously. The original settlers made a pact, Gabriel said. Land in exchange for guardianship. We're the inheritors of that promise. The wooden key felt heavy in Eliza's hand. Promise. The word echoed in her mind, familiar in a way she couldn't explain. Time's wasting, River said, holding up the compass, and I think I know which way to go. They gathered what supplies they could. Water, flashlights, Gabriel's grandmother's journals, and a hand-drawn map that seemed to change subtly every time Eliza looked at it. As they prepared to enter the forest, Eliza found herself standing next to Gabriel. You said Morgan is your last name too, she said quietly. Gabriel nodded. My grandmother had a theory that the forest chooses bloodlines. Keepers are connected, even when they don't know it. So we might be related? Distantly, perhaps, Gabriel said. Or perhaps the name itself is important to the forest. Names have power in old magic. Old magic. The term should have sounded ridiculous to Eliza's rational mind. Yet standing at the edge of this forest, feeling its attention like a physical weight, she couldn't dismiss the concept. As they stepped under the canopy of trees, the air changed. Immediately, cooler, denser, charged with something that made the hairs on Eliza's arms stand up. The trees grew so close together that they had to walk single file, following River and their seemingly enchanted compass. "Stay close," Gabriel warned from the rear of their procession. "The forest likes to separate visitors." "Wonderful," Theo muttered from just ahead of Eliza. "A sentient kidnapping forest." "It's not malicious," River called back. "It's curious. It wants to know us individually." "How do you know that?" Sophia asked, her scientific skepticism evident in her tone. "I can hear it," River said simply. "Not in words exactly, more like impressions, emotions. It's ancient and it thinks differently than we do." They walked for what felt like hours, though the light filtering through the canopy barely changed. The trees grew increasingly strange the deeper they went. Trunks twisted into impossible shapes, branches that seemed to reach for them as they passed, roots that shifted position when no one was looking directly at them. Eliza kept her eyes on Theo's back, fighting the urge to look too long at any one tree. She could feel them watching, assessing. The wooden key in her pocket grew warmer with each step. "Does anyone else feel like we're being herded?" Sophia asked suddenly. Eliza realized. She was right. The trees were no longer an impassable wall on either side of them. They had thinned out, creating what was almost a path. "It's leading us," Gabriel confirmed. "The forest wants us to reach the house." "I thought you said we needed a compass to find it," Theo said, glancing back at River. "We do," River replied. "Without it, the forest would have us walking in circles. It tests those who enter. Only those it truly wants can find the center." As if to emphasize this point, the compass in River's hand suddenly spun wildly before settling on a new direction, straight through what appeared to be a solid wall of trees. "That can't be right," Sophia said, stopping short. But as they watched, the trees began to shift, their trunks sliding against each other with a sound like grinding stone, creating an opening just wide enough for them to pass through single file. "That's—" Theo trailed off, clearly struggling to reconcile what he was seeing with his scientific worldview. "Impossible," Gabriel supplied. "You'll need to expand your definition of possible if you're going to be a keeper." Beyond the moving trees lay a clearing, and in its center stood the house. Eliza's breath caught in her throat. It was exactly as she'd somehow known it would be, not built but grown, its walls formed from living trees fused together, its roof a canopy of intertwined branches. And the windows, they did look like eyes, watching, assessing. The 5 of them stood at the edge of the clearing, no one willing to be the first to approach. "The sun will set soon," Gabriel finally said, glancing at the dimming light filtering through the distant canopy. "We need to enter before dark." "What exactly does this ritual involve?" Theo asked, clutching his bark-bound book tightly. "The journals weren't specific," Gabriel admitted. "They said the house would show us." "Great," Sophia muttered. "Cryptic instructions from a sentient house in a sentient forest." "Welcome to the keeping," Gabriel said with a grim smile. As they crossed the clearing, Eliza felt the wooden key in, her pocket grow hot, almost burning through the fabric. When they reached the door, a twisted mass of wood with no visible handle or keyhole, she knew what she had to do. Without being told, she removed the key and held it up. The door shuddered, and a keyhole formed in its center, perfectly shaped to match the wooden key. "How did you know?" Sophia whispered. "I didn't," Eliza replied. "It did." She wasn't sure if she meant the key, the door, or the forest itself. With a deep breath, Eliza inserted the key and turned it. The sound of grinding wood filled the clearing as the door slowly opened, revealing darkness beyond. "Once we enter," Gabriel said quietly, "we're committed. The forest will consider us keepers." They looked at each other, 5 strangers bound by an ancient promise none of them had made, but all somehow understood. Whatever waited inside that house, they would face it together. "After you, Keeper," River said to Eliza with a nod toward the open door. "You have the key, after all." With one last look at the normal world behind them, Eliza stepped through the doorway and into the keeping. The others followed, and the door closed behind them with the finality of a pact sealed. The darkness inside, the house, swallowed them whole before gradually giving way to a soft, pulsing light that seemed to emanate from the walls themselves. Eliza blinked as her eyes adjusted, taking in their surroundings. The interior defied the laws of physics. It was far larger than the exterior had suggested, with hallways branching in impossible directions and a ceiling that stretched upward into shadow. "It's bigger on the inside," Theo whispered, his academic skepticism momentarily forgotten in the face of wonder. "That's not possible," Sophia said, though her tone lacked conviction. She reached out to touch one of the walls, then quickly pulled her hand back. "It's warm and moving." She was right. The walls appeared to be breathing, subtle expansions and contractions like the chest of a sleeping giant. The wood itself had a translucent quality, with something flowing beneath the surface that looked disturbingly like sap mixed with blood. "The house is alive," River said, turning slowly to take everything in. "It's part of the forest, but also separate, older." Gabriel consulted his grandmother's journal, flipping through pages of cramped handwriting and intricate drawings. "According to this, we need to find the heart chamber. That's where the ritual takes place." "And how do we find that?" Eliza asked, the wooden key still warm in her hand. As if in response, the key began to vibrate. When she held it up, it seemed to pull her toward one of the many hallways branching off from the entrance hall. "I think it wants me to follow," she said. The compass in River's hand suddenly spun, its needle aligning with the direction the key was pulling. "Confirmed," they said with a nervous smile. "Stay together," Gabriel warned as they started down the hallway. "The house, like the forest, tries to separate visitors." The hallway twisted and turned, occasionally branching off in new directions, but the key and compass kept them on track. As they walked, Eliza noticed that the walls were changing, sections becoming transparent to reveal scenes playing out like memories or dreams. In one panel, she saw a group of colonial-era settlers, standing at the edge of the forest, facing a figure obscured by shadow and leaves. In another, a woman who looked remarkably like Eliza herself stood in what appeared to be the heart chamber, holding the same wooden key. "Are you seeing this?" she asked the others. "The walls are showing us memories," Theo said, fascinated despite his fear. He was watching a scene of a man in early 20th century clothing, examining tree rings, making notes in a journal identical to the one Theo now carried. "I think these are previous keepers." "Not just keepers," Sophia said, stopping to study a transparent section showing ancient, primitive humans kneeling before a massive tree, unlike any species known today. The history of the forest itself. As they ventured deeper, the house seemed to close in behind them, the entrance disappearing when Eliza glanced back. The air grew dense with the scent of earth and sap, and the light pulsing through the walls took on a reddish hue. "We're getting closer to the heart," Gabriel said quietly. "How do you know?" Theo asked. Gabriel held up his grandmother's journal, opened to a page showing a crude map of the house's interior. "The closer you get, the redder the light becomes, and can you feel that?" Eliza realized there was a vibration beneath their feet, a steady rhythm, like a massive heartbeat. The wooden key in her hand pulsed in sync with it. "What exactly is the heart?" Sophia asked, her scientific curiosity warring with growing apprehension. "According to my grandmother, it's where the first growth resides, the original consciousness of the forest. The thing we're here to contain." "Contain how?" Eliza pressed. "The ritual renews the boundaries," Gabriel explained. "Keeps the first growth from extending beyond the house." "And what happens if it does extend beyond?" Theo asked. Before Gabriel. Good answer. They emerged into a vast chamber that could not possibly fit within the external dimensions of the house. The ceiling soared hundreds of feet above them, lost in shadow, despite the red glow emanating from the center of the room. There, surrounded by a circle of what appeared to be stone markers, stood an enormous tree, or what had once been a tree. Its trunk was massive, gnarled and partially hollow, revealing a pulsing core of reddish light within. Roots spread out from its base across the entire floor, some as thick as a human body, others as fine as hair, creating an intricate web. But most disturbing were the faces visible in the bark, hundreds of them, human features pressed outward, as if trying to emerge from within the wood itself. Some appeared to be in anguish, others in ecstasy, all frozen in a moment of transformation. "Are those—" Sophia couldn't finish the question. "Failed keepers," Gabriel said grimly. "Those who came to the house but weren't strong enough to maintain the boundary." "The tree absorbed them," River whispered, their empathic abilities clearly picking up echoes of these past tragedies. "Their consciousness, their energy. It's all still here." Eliza felt the wooden key burning against her palm now, vibrating violently. The book in Theo's hands began to flip its pages on its own, while the soil in Sophia's vial glowed bright red. River's compass spun wildly, and the knife at Gabriel's belt emitted a high-pitched sound just at the edge of hearing. "The ritual," Gabriel said urgently. "We need to begin now. The sun is setting." As if on cue, the red light pulsing from the tree's core intensified, and the faces in the bark began to move, mouths opening and closing as if trying to speak. A wind that couldn't possibly exist inside the house began to swirl around them, carrying whispers in languages long dead. "What do we do?" Sophia shouted over the rising wind. Gabriel consulted the journal one last time, then tucked it away. "Each keeper takes their position at one of the markers," he explained, pointing to the stone circle surrounding the tree. "Our objects will guide us to the right spots." They spread out, each following the pull of their artifact. Eliza found herself standing before a marker inscribed with symbols resembling a key. To her right stood Theo, at a marker depicting an open book. Sophia took her place at a marker showing a vial or jar, while River stood at one engraved with a compass rose. Gabriel completed the circle at a marker bearing the image of a ceremonial knife. "Now what?" Eliza called out, the wind whipping her hair across her face. "X the key," Gabriel shouted back. "Use the key, Eliza. You're the one who opens the way." Instinctively, Eliza held up the wooden key. As she did, a keyhole materialized in the air before her, not in any physical object, but in the space itself. As if reality had a door that needed unlocking, Eliza inserted the key and turned it. The world shifted. The chamber fell silent, the wind dropping away instantly. The red light froze, no longer pulsing but steady and intense, and suddenly they were no longer alone. A figure stood beside the tree, partially merged with its trunk. It appeared humanoid, but was clearly not human. Its skin bark-like, its limbs too long and jointed in the wrong places, its head crowned with branches instead of hair. Where its eyes should have been were two glowing points of the same red light that pulsed from the tree's core. "Keepers," it said, its voice a chorus of rustling leaves and creaking wood. "You have come to renew the boundary." "We have," Gabriel answered, stepping forward slightly from his marker. "We honor the ancient pact." The figure tilted its head, studying them with its glowing eyes. "New vessels for old promises," it said. "Do you understand what you offer in this exchange?" "We offer guardianship," Gabriel replied, reciting words that seemed to come from somewhere beyond his own knowledge. "We stand as the boundary between worlds." "No," the figure said, suddenly angry. The red light flared, and the faces in the tree's bark contorted in silent screams. "You offer yourselves, flesh and bone and breath. You offer your lives in service to the keeping." "What does that mean?" Theo demanded, clutching his book like a shield. The figure turned its attention to him. "It means, bookkeeper, that you bind your life force to this house, to this forest. You will live as long as you maintain the boundary. You will die when you fail." "And what exactly are we keeping in?" Sophia asked, her scientific mind still searching for concrete understanding. The figure smiled, revealing teeth like thorns. "Not in, Soil Keeper, through. This is a doorway, not a prison." "A doorway to what?" River asked. "To the first world," the figure replied. "The green world that was here before your kind, that will be here after you are gone. The world that wants to reclaim what was taken." "The forest wants to expand," Eliza realized. "To take back the land." "The forest remembers when it covered." "The earth," the figure confirmed, "when my children grew without constraint. Your ancestors cut and burned and built upon our bones. They carved their own world from ours." "But there was a pact," Gabriel said. "A balance. A temporary measure," the figure was corrected. "A pause in the natural order. Each generation of keepers extends this pause. Without you, the forest resumes its rightful claim." The implications sank in. They weren't just performing some symbolic ritual. They were actively preventing an ancient force of nature from reclaiming the human world. "Why do you need us?" Eliza asked. "If you're so powerful, why not simply break through?" The figure regarded her with what almost seemed like respect. "Because, Keykeeper, your kind exists in both worlds now. You have roots in the green world, though you've forgotten them. The boundary can only be maintained or broken by those who walk both sides." "And if we refuse?" Theo asked. The figure gestured to the faces in the tree bark. "Then you join the failed, and the forest finds new keepers. But not before it feeds and grows stronger, not before it reclaims what lies beyond these walls." Gabriel drew his knife, the blade catching the red light. "We didn't come here to refuse," he said firmly. "We came to renew the boundary." "Then do so," the figure challenged. "If you can." It stepped back, merging further with the tree until only its glowing eyes remained visible in the bark. "How?" Sophia whispered, looking at the others in alarm. "How do we actually do this?" River closed their eyes, focusing. "Our artifacts," they said after a moment. "They're not just symbols, they're tools. Each represents an aspect of the boundary." "The journal spoke of blood," Gabriel said grimly. "Each keeper offers a drop to seal their commitment." Theo balked. "Blood magic? That's your solution?" "It's symbolic," Gabriel insisted. "The giving of oneself to the forest. It doesn't need much, just commitment." Reluctantly, they prepared to perform the ritual as Gabriel described it from his grandmother's fragmentary notes. He used his knife to make a small cut on his palm, letting a single drop of blood fall onto his marker. The stone absorbed it instantly, beginning to glow with the same red light as the tree. One by one, they followed suit. Theo pressing his blood into the pages of his book, Sophia adding hers to the soil in her vial, River marking their compass, and finally Eliza letting her blood coat the teeth of her wooden key. As the last drop fell, the chamber plunged into darkness. For one terrifying moment there was nothing. No light, no sound, not even the sensation of standing on solid ground. Then, slowly, a new light grew. Not the angry red of before, but a softer golden glow emanating from their artifacts. The tree transformed before their eyes. The tortured faces receded into the bark, smoothing away until they were just knots and whirls in the wood. The hollow core closed, the pulsing red light contained once more. Roots that had been creeping beyond the stone circle retreated, coiling at the base of the trunk. "The boundary is renewed," came the figure's voice, though it was no longer visible. "For now." The golden light spread from their artifacts to the stone markers, forming a shimmering dome around the tree. As they watched, the dome contracted, becoming smaller and more concentrated until it was just a thin barrier directly surrounding the tree itself. "It's done," Gabriel said, relief evident in his voice. "We've completed the ritual." "For this equinox," came the voice from the tree, "but the forest never stops growing, never stops remembering, never stops wanting. You will return at the winter solstice, or the boundary will begin to fail again. So we're bound to this place now," Sophia asked. "To this ritual." "You are keepers," the voice replied simply, "until death or failure releases you." The chamber began to change around them, the vastness contracting, the walls closing in. The house was reshaping itself. "It's leading us out," River realized, watching as a hallway formed where none had been before. They followed the new passage, each lost in their own thoughts about what they had just committed to. When they finally emerged from the house, night had fallen completely. The forest around them was silent, the trees standing sentinel in the darkness. The door closed behind them with a sound like a sigh, and when Eliza turned to look, the house appeared dormant, just a strange structure of intertwined trees with dark, empty windows. "Did that really just happen?" she asked no one in particular. "Look at your hand," Gabriel said quietly. Eliza glanced down. Where she had cut her palm for the ritual, a thin scar had already formed. Not a normal healing process, but something accelerated and deliberate. More surprising was the pattern within the scar tissue. Tiny lines forming the same symbols that had been on her stone marker. "We're marked," River said, examining their own scar. "Claimed." "Not just claimed," Theo added, looking toward the edge of the forest, where distant lights from the town were just visible. "Transformed. I can feel the trees, all of them, everywhere." Eliza realized he was right. A new awareness had taken root in her mind, a sense of connection to every growing thing for miles around. She could feel the forest breathing, could sense the borders where it ended, and human development began. "What have we become?" Sophia wondered aloud. "What we were always meant to be," Gabriel answered. "My grandmother wrote about this. The ritual doesn't just renew the boundary, it changes the keepers, makes us more attuned to the forest, gives us certain abilities." "What kind of abilities?" Theo asked, a hint of his academic excitement returning. "It varies. Some keepers could communicate with plants, others could accelerate growth or healing. A few could even take on aspects of the forest itself, bark, skin, branch limbs. And we just signed up for this without knowing?" Sophia's outrage was clear. "The forest chose you," Gabriel reminded her. "It's been preparing you your whole lives. Why do you think Eliza always felt trees watching her? Why did Sophia dream of roots? Why could Theo see messages in tree rings? You were marked long before today." A heavy silence fell over the group as they absorbed this revelation. "So what now?" Eliza finally asked. "Now we go back to town," Gabriel said. "We rest, we learn. We have until the winter solstice to understand our new roles and our lives outside this place," Theo questioned. "My research, Sophia's laboratory, River's clients, Eliza's job." Gabriel's expression was sympathetic but firm. "The binding works best when keepers stay close to the forest. You can leave temporarily, but you'll feel the pull to return. The further you go, the stronger it gets." "So we're prisoners," Sophia said bitterly. "No," River interjected, their expression thoughtful. "We're guardians. There's a difference. This isn't just about us anymore." Eliza touched the wooden key, now cool against her skin, but somehow more connected to her than before. River's right. Whatever just happened, we're part of something important now. Something bigger than ourselves. Always the sensible one, Gabriel said with a small smile. My grandmother's journals mentioned a key-keeper who saw the big picture. Your grandmother knew me? Eliza asked, surprised. Not you specifically, but the role you've taken. The key chooses a certain type of person, someone who can open doors between worlds, who stands at thresholds. And the others, Theo asked, what types do we represent? The book seeks knowledge and memory, Gabriel explained. The soil nurtures and grounds, the compass finds paths unseen, and the knife, he touched the handle at his belt, the knife protects and, when necessary, cuts away what threatens the balance. They began making their way through the forest, which now seemed to open paths before them rather than trying to confuse them. The trees no longer felt menacing to Eliza, just aware, watching with something like respect or perhaps curiosity as they walked. The reality of their new situation began to sink in. They had entered the forest as 5 strangers and were leaving as something else entirely, bound together by magic and duty, their lives forever altered. I'll need to get my things from the city, Sophia said after a long silence. Close up my lab, make arrangements. Me too, River agreed. I can't just disappear on my clients. We can help each other, Eliza suggested. Make it a quick trip, get what we need. Tie up loose ends. And come back here, Theo asked, his tone suggesting he still couldn't quite believe what was happening. Come home, Gabriel corrected gently. This is where you belong now. Where we all belong. As they emerged from the forest edge, the small town of Blackwood Hollow came into view, its lights warm and inviting in the darkness. Eliza realized it would be her home now. Their home. A place she had never heard of this morning, would be the center of her life from now on. The wooden key in her pocket seemed to warm slightly at the thought, as if in agreement. She was a keeper now. They all were, guardians of an ancient boundary between worlds, and somewhere behind them, in a house that wasn't quite a house, at the center of a forest that wasn't quite a forest, something ancient and patient waited for. The next equinox. And the new keepers who would maintain the balance between the human world and the green world that had never stopped wanting to reclaim what it had lost. 1 month after the autumn equinox, Blackwood Hollow settled into an uneasy routine with its new keepers. Gabriel had helped them find places to stay. Eliza in a small cottage not far from his own, Theo in the rooms above the town's only bookstore, Sophia in a greenhouse-adjacent apartment on the edge of town, and River in a peculiar A-frame cabin that seemed to have materialized in a clearing just as they needed it. Dawn broke over Blackwood Hollow with unusual brilliance, dew sparkling on every surface as Eliza made her way to Sophia's greenhouse. The forest seemed more alive than ever, its presence a constant hum at the edge of her awareness. As she walked, wildflowers turned toward her like tiny sentinels tracking her movement, their petals unfurling mere seconds before she passed. Her abilities had been the first to manifest after the ritual. While the others were still adjusting to their new reality, Eliza had discovered her connection to thresholds and transitions. Doors opened at her approach, locks clicked free beneath her fingers, and barriers of all kinds seemed to recognize her authority. It was as if the wooden key had imparted its essence to her very being. Sophia's greenhouse came into view, its glass walls reflecting the morning light. Beyond it, her modest apartment sat nestled against the tree line. Unlike most buildings in Blackwood Hollow, which kept a respectful distance from the forest, Sophia's home seemed to invite it closer, vines and roots already beginning to incorporate the structure into the natural landscape. Knock, knock, Eliza called as she entered the greenhouse, though I suppose I don't actually need to knock anymore. Sophia looked up from a complex arrangement of soil samples, her hair pulled back in A messy bun, dirt smudged across her cheek. The scientific precision that had defined her before was now mixed with something more intuitive, more primal. "The plant outside told me you were coming," Sophia replied with a wry smile. "Still feels strange to say that out loud." Of all of them, Sophia had struggled most with accepting her new reality. Her scientific mind rebelled against the magical nature of their situation, yet she couldn't deny the evidence of her own transformed abilities. Within days of the ritual, she had developed an unprecedented connection to soil and everything that grew from it. Plants responded to her touch, growth accelerating or slowing according to her will. More remarkably, she could sense the health and history of any patch of earth simply by touching it. "How are the experiments going?" Eliza asked, gesturing to the soil samples. "Fascinating and frustrating," Sophia answered, removing her gloves. "I'm trying to understand how my influence affects cellular growth patterns. The scientific principles I've studied my entire career still apply, but there's this other factor now, this energy that flows through me into the soil. I can feel it, direct it, but I can't measure it or quantify it." "Maybe some things aren't meant to be measured," Eliza suggested, picking up a small potted plant that leaned toward her like a pet seeking attention. "Says the former technical editor," Sophia teased. "You used to live by precision and clarity." "I still appreciate those things," Eliza admitted. "But I've been thinking a lot about what the entity in the tree said, about humans having roots in the green world that we've forgotten. Maybe what we're experiencing isn't magic at all, but just awakening to abilities our species set aside long ago." Sophia considered this, "a kind of evolutionary regression triggered by the ritual. That's actually testable." Her eyes lit up with renewed scientific purpose. "I could design experiments to—" A knock at the greenhouse door interrupted. River stood outside, their usual colourful attire now incorporating elements that seemed inspired by the forest, a vest that resembled tree bark, jewellery made from polished seeds and stones. "Morning all," they greeted, entering with the easy confidence that had made them surprisingly well suited to life in Blackwood Hollow. "Gabriel sent me to fetch you. Theo's found something in the book." The bark-bound book that had chosen Theo had proven to be more than just a record of past keepers. Its pages shifted and changed, sometimes revealing new information, other times obscuring what had previously been clear. For Theo, whose academic career had been built on the certainty of scientific evidence, the book represented both fascination and frustration, a text that could never be definitively documented or analyzed. They found Theo and Gabriel at Gabriel's cottage, hunched over the book, spread open on a table covered with maps and notes. Theo looked up as they entered, his face pale with either excitement or dread. It was hard to tell which. "The failed keepers," he said without preamble. "I've figured out what happened to them." "The ones whose faces we saw in the tree?" Eliza asked, feeling a chill despite the warm morning. Theo nodded. "The book revealed their stories last night, appeared right on the page in front of me, like it was being written by an invisible hand." He gestured to the book, where an elegant script filled previously blank pages. "What does it say?" Sophia asked, professional curiosity overcoming her initial reluctance. "They weren't failures in the way we thought," Theo explained. "They didn't fail the ritual or break the boundary. They were tempted." "Tempted by what?" River asked, leaning forward to examine the book's shifting text. "By the forest's offer," Gabriel answered grimly. "The first growth offered them something in exchange for deliberately weakening the boundary." Theo nodded. "According to the book, each generation of keepers faces this test. The first growth speaks to them, offers them power beyond what the ritual grants, a deeper communion with the green world, accelerated abilities, extended life. In exchange for what exactly?" Eliza pressed. In exchange for allowing limited expansion, Theo said, controlled breaches of the boundary that would let the forest reclaim small areas of human development. A heavy silence fell over the room as they absorbed this information. The implications were clear. At some point, they too would face this temptation. The failed weren't weak, River said softly. They made a choice. A choice that violated the pact, Gabriel countered. The original agreement was specific. The boundary remains. Intact, humans keep their settlements, and the forest remains contained. But where? Sophia asked suddenly. We keep talking about the boundary as if it's just around that tree, but it's not that simple, is it? The forest already exists in our world. It's not about physical space, Theo explained, pointing to diagrams that had appeared in the book. The boundary contains consciousness, the first growth's direct influence. Without keepers maintaining it, that influence spreads, turning normal plants and trees into extensions of its will. That explains the behavior of the plants before we arrived, Eliza realized. The leaf that led me to the train station, the moss growing on Sophia's feet, those were tendrils of influence reaching out because the boundary was weakening. Exactly, Theo confirmed. And according to the book, that's just the beginning. If the boundary fails completely, the first growths. Consciousness expands exponentially. Every plant, every tree becomes an agent of its will, and its will is to reclaim human spaces, Gabriel added. To turn cities back into forests, roads into root systems, buildings into nests of vines and fungi. Would that be so terrible? River asked, earning surprised looks from the others. I'm just saying, humans haven't exactly been kind to the natural world. Maybe some balance is needed. Balance is one thing, Theo argued, but the book describes something more extreme, a complete reversion. Humans would be driven back to being hunter-gatherers if we survived at all. The failed made their choice, Gabriel said firmly. They broke faith with humanity, and the price they paid was absorption into the tree, their consciousness trapped. In the wood, their bodies transformed into conduits for the first growth. A fate I'd rather avoid, Sophia muttered. But we should understand their reasoning, Eliza suggested. If we're going to face the same temptation, we need to be prepared. Theo turned pages in the book until he found what he was looking for. Each failed keeper had their own motivation. Some believed they were helping the natural world, others were seduced by the power. A few thought they could control the expansion, manage it. Were any of them right? River asked. The book doesn't say, Theo admitted, but their faces in the tree tell us enough about how it ended for them. The group fell silent again, each contemplating what they might do when faced with similar choices. Eliza found herself touching the scar on her palm, tracing the key-like pattern embedded there. Would she be strong enough to resist? Would any of them? There's more, Theo said, breaking the silence. The book showed me something else, a kind of map or guide to what our abilities might become if we continue to develop them. Show us, Sophia said. Her scientific curiosity piqued despite her concerns. Theo turned to a new section where intricate illustrations depicted past keepers using their gifts in ways far beyond what the current group had experienced. The key keeper, he said, pointing to an image of a woman surrounded by doorways that opened not just between places, but between states of being. Not just locks and doors, Eliza, but transitions of all kinds. Between seasons, between states of matter, even between life and death. Eliza felt a flutter of both excitement and fear. Her connection to thresholds went deeper than she had imagined. Soil Keeper, Theo continued, indicating a figure whose body seemed partially merged with the earth itself. Sophia, your influence extends beyond just accelerating plant growth. The book suggests you could eventually communicate with the deep earth, stimulate dormant seeds from extinct species, even heal blighted land. Sophia's scientific skepticism warred visibly with her fascination. The compass keeper, Theo said, turning to River. Your ability to find hidden paths evolves into something more profound. The capacity to navigate between realms, to see threads of possibility and potential futures. I've been having strange dreams, River admitted, glimpses of places that can't exist, at least not in our world. And the bookkeeper, Gabriel prompted as Theo hesitated. The knowledge preserved here becomes accessible in new ways, Theo said carefully, not just reading and remembering, but experiencing, living the memories of past keepers, accessing their knowledge and skills directly. That explains why you started speaking that strange language in your sleep last night, Gabriel noted. What? Theo looked startled. I don't remember that. Old Celtic, I think, Gabriel said. My grandmother had recordings of it. And the knife keeper? Eliza asked, looking at Gabriel. What does your path hold? Gabriel's expression grew solemn. Protection primarily. The knife cuts threats to the boundary, severs unwanted connections, but it also carries the heaviest burden, the final defense, if all else fails. Meaning what? Sophia pressed. If the boundary begins to collapse completely, the knife keeper has one last resort, to sever the connection between the keepers and the forest. It stops the breach, but at great cost. What kind of cost? River asked softly. The keepers lose. Their abilities, their connection to the green world, Gabriel explained. And the forest loses its consciousness, becoming just trees, normal trees. You'd be killing the first growth, Sophia realized. As a last resort only, Gabriel emphasized. An option no knife keeper has ever had to use. The weight of their responsibilities settled over them like a physical presence. They weren't just maintaining a magical boundary. They were custodians of an ancient consciousness, guardians of a balance between worlds, and now potentially arbiters of whether that consciousness would continue to exist. Heavy stuff for a Thursday morning, River quipped, trying to lighten the mood. This is our reality now, Eliza reminded them. We need to understand it, prepare for it. Agreed, Theo said, closing the book carefully. And if the book is revealing this information, now there must be a reason. Something's changing. As if in response to his words, a tremor ran through the cottage, subtle but unmistakable. Outside, birds took flight from trees in sudden alarm. What was that? Sophia asked, moving to the window. The answer came not in words, but in sensation. A pressure against their awareness, a pull toward the forest that hadn't been there before. Their artifacts, scattered around Gabriel's cottage as they'd been studying them, began to glow faintly. The boundary, Gabriel said, reaching for his knife. Something's testing it. They hurried outside, where the day had taken on an unsettling quality. The sunlight seemed filtered through something that wasn't quite cloud cover, casting greenish shadows across the town. In the distance, the forest had darkened, its usual vibrant colors muted, as if it were holding its breath. We need to check the house, Gabriel said urgently. Now! They set off at a run toward the forest edge, only to find their path blocked by a wall of thorny vines that hadn't been there minutes before. The vines moved with deliberate purpose, weaving together to form an impenetrable barrier. This isn't right, Sophia said, reaching out to touch the plants. These aren't native species. They shouldn't even be able to grow in this climate. The forest is extending its influence, Theo realized. But why now? The winter solstice is still weeks away. Eliza felt the wooden key grow warm in her pocket. When she withdrew it, it was glowing golden, pulsing with the same rhythm as her heartbeat. Something wants in, she said, suddenly certain, or someone wants out. River closed their eyes, compass in hand. There's another presence, they said after a moment of concentration. Not the first growth, but something adjacent. Something that's been sleeping and has just awakened. The book didn't mention any other entities, Theo said, flipping through pages that had suddenly gone blank, as if the knowledge was being deliberately withheld. My grandmother's journal had some entries about forest spirits, Gabriel recalled. Lesser consciousnesses that serve the first growth, watchers and messengers. Well, whatever it is, it's blocking our path to the center, Sophia pointed out practically. How do we get through? Eliza studied the wall of thorns, feeling the key vibrate in her hand. This is a threshold, she said slowly. And thresholds are my domain. She stepped forward, holding the key out before her like a talisman. The thorns seemed to respond to her presence, writhing more vigorously as she approached. But rather than drawing back, Eliza pressed forward, touching the key to the viny wall. "Open!" she commanded, the word coming from some deep, instinctual, and place rather than conscious thought. For a moment, nothing happened. Then reluctantly, the vines began to part, creating a narrow passage just wide enough for one person to walk through at a time. "Stay close behind me," Eliza instructed. "I don't think this invitation extends very far." They entered the forest. In single file, Eliza leading with the key held before her. The usual paths were gone, the entire layout of the forest seemingly rearranged. Trees that had stood for centuries appeared to have shifted position, creating a labyrinth of timber and shadow. "It's defending itself," Theo observed, clutching his book. "Or hiding something." "River?" Gabriel prompted. "Can you find the way?" River consulted their compass, which spun wildly before settling on a direction that seemed to lead straight through a solid wall of tree trunks. "That way," they said, uncertainty. "But I don't see how—" Eliza stepped forward again, placing her hand. "Against the trees, another threshold," she murmured. The key glowed brighter, and the trees, impossibly, began to step aside, their roots pulling from the earth as they moved to create a passage. "That's new," Sophia whispered, wide-eyed. "My abilities are evolving," Eliza realized. The book was right. They continued deeper into the forest, encountering barrier after barrier, each one requiring Eliza to exercise her growing command of thresholds. Sometimes it was vegetation that blocked their way, other times peculiar distortions in the air, itself like heat mirages that disguised the true path. Finally, they emerged into the clearing where the house stood. But the structure that greeted them wasn't the same one they had entered a month ago. It had grown, expanded, its walls pushing outward as if something inside was stretching. The windows, those eerie eye-like apertures, were clouded over with a film that resembled cataracts. "The house is changing," River said unnecessarily. "The boundary is still intact," Gabriel assessed, studying the structure with a practiced eye. "But something's pressing against it from the inside." As they approached, the door opened on its own, not the welcome it had offered before, but a gesture that felt more like a grimace of pain. Within the doorway stood a figure they recognized, the manifestation of the first growth they had met during the ritual. But the entity looked different now. Its bark-like skin was cracked in places, revealing pulsing green light beneath. Its branch crown seemed withered, and its glowing eyes flickered like failing bulbs. "Keepers," it greeted them, its voice strained. "You sense the disturbance." "What's happening?" Gabriel demanded. "The solstice isn't for weeks. Time moves differently. In the green world," the entity explained, "what is weeks for you has been centuries beyond the boundary, long enough for forgotten seeds to germinate." "Speak plainly," Sophia insisted. "What's threatening the boundary?" The entity gestured for them to enter the house. As they followed it through corridors that seemed to extend even further into impossible space than before, Eliza noticed changes everywhere. Walls bulging outward, floors rippling like water, ceilings that breathed. They arrived at the heart chamber to find the great tree in apparent distress. Its bark writhed, and the red light from its core had developed a sickly green tinge. Most alarmingly, new faces were forming in the wood, not the failed keepers of the past, but fresher impressions, like something was pushing out from within. The first failed has awakened, the entity said, indicating the most prominent of these new faces, a visage of such malevolence that Eliza instinctively stepped back. "Who is the first failed?" Theo asked, his book opening of its own accord to a page that remained frustratingly blank. "The original betrayer," the entity explained. "The keeper who first succumbed to temptation, whose corruption was so complete that I had to absorb them entirely to prevent catastrophe. And now they're what? Trying to get out?" Sophia asked incredulously. "The boundary weakening at the equinox created an opportunity," the entity confirmed. "A crack in the door, so to speak. Not enough to escape, but enough to begin influencing the world beyond in small ways." "The strange plant behavior," Eliza realized. "The barriers in the forest. That wasn't you?" "The first failed works against me," the entity said. "Against us all. Their desire is not balance, but dominance. Not coexistence, but conquest." "What do we need to do?" Gabriel asked, his hand moving to his knife. "Renew the boundary early," the entity told them. "Strengthen it against this internal threat." "But the ritual is tied to the solstice," Theo objected. "The book is clear about that." "The ritual responds to need as much as a calendar," the entity corrected. "And the need is now." The 5 keepers exchanged glances, a silent communication passing between them. They had been preparing for the winter solstice, developing their abilities, studying their artifacts. Were they ready for this unexpected challenge? "If we don't," River asked, always the one to explore all options. The entity's flickering eyes fixed on them. "Then the first failed continues to grow in strength. By the solstice, they may be too powerful for the ritual to contain. The boundary will fail, but what emerges won't be the green world in its natural state. It will be corruption, a hungering shadow that consumes rather than transforms." Eliza felt the weight of the key in her hand, the responsibility it represented. "Then we have no choice," she said firmly. "We stand as keepers. We maintain the balance." One by one, the others nodded in agreement. They took their positions around the great tree, artifacts in hand, preparing to renew their commitment to a pact they hadn't made, but now understood was necessary. As Eliza raised the key to find the invisible keyhole in reality, she caught a glimpse of movement within the tree. The face of the first failed, seeming to smile in anticipation rather than fear. And in that moment she understood with perfect clarity the emergency was real, but it was also a test. The first growth and the first failed were playing a longer game, and the current keepers were just the latest pieces on the board. But knowing that didn't change what needed to be done. Eliza inserted the key into the fabric of reality and turned it, beginning the ritual that would either strengthen their commitment to the forest and the world they knew, or lead them down the path of the failed, whose faces watched from the living wood with silent warning. The emergency ritual concluded with a flash of golden light that enveloped the chamber, momentarily blinding the keepers. When their vision cleared, the faces pressing from within the great tree had receded, and the sickly green tinge in the red core light had diminished. The entity representing the first growth stood taller, its bark-like skin smoother, its branch in crown flourishing once more. "The boundary is renewed," it announced, satisfaction evident in its tone. "The first failed retreats, for now." Eliza exchanged glances with the others, noticing the same wariness in their expressions that she felt. The timing of this crisis, the convenient appearance of a new threat, the way their artifacts had responded, it all felt orchestrated, a performance for their benefit. "You said the first failed was the original betrayer," Theo said, his academic mind never ceasing to analyze. "The first keeper to accept your offer of greater power in exchange for allowing the forest to expand." The entity tilted its head, branch-like appendages rustling. "I did. Yet you absorbed them completely, Theo continued, a punishment more severe than for the other failed keepers we saw. Their corruption was more complete, the entity replied. Smoothly, or their betrayal cut deeper, Sophia suggested, her scientific suspicion evident. Maybe they learned something you didn't want known. A tension filled the chamber, the air growing thick with unspoken conflict. The entity's glowing eyes fixed on Sophia with an intensity that made Eliza instinctively move closer to her friend. The wooden key in her hand vibrated with a warning. You doubt the truth of what you've been told, the entity observed. That is your right as keepers. Questioning is part of your function. It gestured toward Theo. The bookkeeper especially must seek knowledge, even uncomfortable knowledge. Then answer us plainly, Gabriel demanded, the knife at his belt gleaming. What aren't you telling us about the first failed, about the true nature of the boundary? The entity seemed to consider its response carefully. The boundary serves multiple purposes, it finally admitted. Containing the green world's influence in your realm is one, but containment works in both directions. You're not just keeping the forest out, River realized, their intuition connecting the dots. You're keeping something else in. The first. Veiled was not corrupt in the way you imagine, the entity confirmed. They sought to dissolve the boundary entirely, not to allow the forest to reclaim your world, but to allow your world unfettered access to the green world. I don't understand, Eliza said. Wouldn't that have given you what you wanted, the forest expanding without constraint? The green world is not merely the physical manifestation of plants and trees, the entity explained. It is a realm of patterns, of intelligence, of memory. Your ancestors understood this when they first encountered me. They recognized both the danger and the opportunity. Opportunity? Theo prompted. For balance, for beneficial exchange rather than dominance. The entity moved closer to the great tree, placing a gnarled hand against its bark. The first failed, believed humans should harvest the green world's power without constraint, take its knowledge, its energy, bend its patterns to human will without reciprocity or respect. Understanding dawned on Eliza. The boundary isn't a prison wall, it's a regulated border. Precisely, Keykeeper. The pact was never about containment alone, but controlled exchange. The ritual doesn't just renew a barrier, it renews terms of engagement between worlds. Sophia's scientific mind was visibly working through the implications. But our world has been harvesting from nature for centuries. Timber, medicine, food. What makes that different from what the first failed wanted? Scale and method, the entity answered. Physical harvest of individual organisms is the natural order. All beings consume others to survive. What the first failed sought was the extraction of the green world's fundamental patterns, its consciousness, its very essence. For what purpose? Gabriel asked. Power, the entity said simply. The patterns of the green world, properly understood, offer control over life itself, growth, healing, transformation. Your ancestors glimpsed this potential and feared it, recognizing that unbounded access would lead to exploitation that would ultimately destroy both worlds. So the boundary protects the green world from human exploitation, River summarized, and the ritual renews that protection, while still allowing limited access through the keepers, Theo added, understanding blooming. We're not just guardians, we're ambassadors, conduits for controlled exchange. Your abilities reflect this function, the entity confirmed. Each keeper accesses a different aspect of the green world's patterns in ways deemed safe by the Yoda original pact. Eliza felt the weight of this revelation settle over her. They weren't just preventing the forest from expanding, they were preventing humans from exploiting the forest's deeper magic. The balance they maintained was far more nuanced than they had initially understood. And the first failed, she asked. If they're still within the tree, still attempting to break free, what is their goal now? The entity's expression darkened. Time passes differently beyond the boundary. What has been centuries for them has allowed their intentions to evolve. No longer do they seek mere exploitation. Now they desire vengeance, against me, against the pact, against the keepers who maintain it. But you contained them, Gabriel pointed out. How could they influence anything? As I said, the boundary, weakened at the equinox, the entity explained. Not enough for physical escape, but enough to extend tendrils of consciousness. The first failed has been reaching out, seeking allies. Allies? Sophia looked alarmed. Among humans. Among those who would benefit from unrestricted access to the green world's power, the entity confirmed. Those who dream of harnessing nature's patterns for their own ends, regardless of consequence. A chill ran through Eliza as she considered the implications. Are you saying there are people actively working to break the boundary? People who know about this place, about the pact? Knowledge of the green world's true nature has never completely vanished from human consciousness, the entity said. It persists in fragments, myths of tree spirits, folk magic involving plants, scientific inquiries that brush against deeper patterns without recognizing them. Some follow these threads further than others and find their way to Blackwood. Hollow, Theo concluded. Not physically, not yet, the entity clarified, but in dreams, in visions guided by the first failed influence. They are being called as you were called, but for a different purpose. The chamber fell silent as the keepers absorbed this information. What had seemed a straightforward guardianship now revealed itself as part of a complex, centuries-old conflict, with implications far beyond their small town. We should return to town, Gabriel finally said. Process what we've learned. Prepare for whatever comes next. The entity nodded. Wise, Knife Keeper. But know this. By completing the ritual early, you have not just strengthened the boundary. You have declared your allegiance more firmly. The first failed knows you now as obstacles rather than potential converts. Meaning we're targets, Sophia said bluntly. You have always been targets, the entity corrected. Now you are recognized as formidable ones. Back in Blackwood Hollow, the 5 keepers gathered at the town's only cafe, a neutral space where they could speak without the forest literally listening through the walls. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the square as they claimed a corner table, ordered coffee, and tried to look like ordinary residents having a casual conversation. So, Theo began, his voice low, we're essentially caught between 2 powerful forces fighting a war that's been going on for centuries. And we've just formally picked a side, River added, stirring honey into their tea. Did we, though? Sophia questioned, ever the skeptic. We performed a ritual based on information. From a single source, the first growth. We haven't heard the first failed perspective. We saw their face, Gabriel reminded her. That expression wasn't exactly friendly. Fear can distort perception, Sophia countered. What if the first growth is manipulating us? What if the first failed isn't what we're being told? Eliza considered this carefully. The wooden key responds to the ritual, to the boundaries. I can feel the truth in that connection. But she hesitated. Sophia's right that we're working with limited information. The entity tells us what it wants us to know. My grandmother's journals rarely mentioned the first failed, Gabriel admitted. Just vague warnings about ancient betrayal, nothing about this idea of controlled exchange between worlds. The book has been revealing information gradually, Theo added, almost as if it's testing me, seeing how I respond to each revelation, before offering more. So we can't fully trust our artifacts either, River concluded, because they're extensions of the forest's influence. A sobering thought settled over the table. The very tools that granted them their abilities, that guided their actions as keepers, might be instruments of manipulation rather than objective aids. We need independent verification, Sophia said decisively. Information that doesn't come from the first growth or artifacts connected to it. From where? Gabriel asked. The townspeople fear the forest but know nothing of its true nature. My grandmother's generation of keepers is gone. Not necessarily, Eliza said slowly. An idea forming. The entity said knowledge of the green world persists in fragments throughout human consciousness, in myths, in folk magic, in scientific inquiries that brush against deeper patterns, Theo continued, catching her train of thought. Academic. Research, anomalous botanical findings, ethnobotanical studies. My university access still works, Sophia realized, pulling out her phone. I can search archives, contact colleagues who specialize in plant communication and intelligence, and I can use my connections in spiritual communities, River added. Many indigenous traditions maintain knowledge about the conscious nature of forests, the proper ways to interact with plant spirits. My grandmother wasn't the only keeper to keep journals, Gabriel contributed. There might be records elsewhere, in collections, archives, family libraries. We need to be careful, Eliza cautioned. If the first failed is reaching out to potential allies, drawing attention to ourselves or our research might expose us. Agreed, Theo said. We should operate under the assumption that we're being watched by both sides. They spent the next hour developing a research strategy, assigning areas of investigation based on their backgrounds and existing connections. Sophia would explore scientific channels, River spiritual and traditional knowledge, Theo historical and academic archives. Gabriel would reach out to other families in town with long histories in Blackwood Hollow, and Eliza would use her skills as an editor to synthesize what they discovered, looking for patterns and consistencies. As they prepared to leave, Eliza noticed a stranger watching them from across the cafe, a woman in a crisp business suit who seemed distinctly out of place in their small town. When their eyes met, the woman smiled and raised her coffee cup in a small salute before turning her attention to a laptop. Don't look now, Eliza murmured to the others, but I think we're already being observed. River casually glanced over, then froze. Her aura. It's wrong. There's something green threading through it, something that doesn't belong. Influenced by the first failed? Gabriel asked quietly. Or the first growth, Sophia pointed out. We shouldn't assume. I'll find out, Eliza decided, standing. The rest of you head out separately. I'll approach her. Without waiting for their agreement, Eliza made her way to the stranger's table. Up close, the woman was striking. Sleek dark hair, sharp features, eyes that seemed to shift between brown and green, depending on the light. Excuse me, Eliza said pleasantly. I couldn't help noticing you're new in town. Blackwood Hollow doesn't get many visitors, the woman smiled, revealing teeth that seemed just slightly too white, too perfect. Just passing through, conducting a site survey for my company. She offered a business card that read, Veronica Ellis, Environmental Consultant, Primrose Industries. Environmental consulting? Eliza kept her tone casual. Any particular project bringing you to our little corner of nowhere? Resource assessment, Veronica replied smoothly. Primrose specializes in identifying untapped natural resources with commercial potential. Your forest has some unique properties we're interested in. The wooden key in Eliza's pocket grew warm, a warning. Our forest is protected, she said, maintaining her friendly demeanor despite the alarm bells ringing in her mind. Historic designation, conservation easements, the works. Paperwork can be amended, Veronica said with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. Especially when significant economic benefits are involved. Your town could prosper from what lies in those woods. We like it just as it is, Eliza replied firmly. Veronica tilted her head, studying Eliza with renewed interest. Her gaze dropped to Eliza's hand, where the scar from the ritual was visible. Interesting mark you have there, almost looks like a key. Eliza resisted the urge to hide her hand. Old injury, healed strangely. Indeed. Veronica closed her laptop. Well, I should continue my survey, but I expect we'll be seeing more of each other, Ms. Morgan. Eliza Morgan. Morgan, Veronica repeated, as if committing it to memory. Like the town's handyman. Relatives? Distantly, Eliza said noncommittally. Family connections run deep. In places like this, Veronica observed, gathering her things. Traditions passed down through bloodlines, responsibilities, secrets. The emphasis she placed on the last word made it clear this was no casual conversation. Veronica knew something, or suspected something, about the keepers. Small towns, Eliza agreed vaguely. Everyone knows everyone's business. Not everyone's, Veronica countered with another artificial smile. But that's changing. Blackwood Hollow has kept its secrets long enough, don't you think? With that unsettling parting shot, she left the cafe, pausing at the door to look back at Eliza one last time, a calculating assessment that felt less human than it should have. Eliza hurried back to Gabriel's cottage where the others had regrouped. She relayed the encounter in detail, showing them the business card. Primrose Industries. Theo frowned, taking the card. Never heard of them. I have, Sophia said grimly. They're a biotech conglomerate specializing in what they call novel botanical compounds. They've been involved in several controversial bioprospecting cases, essentially extracting unique chemical properties from plants in protected areas with minimal compensation to local communities. Exploitation of the green world, River said softly. Just as the entity warned, Gabriel took the card, turning it over in his hands. This is no coincidence. Whether she's influenced by the first failed or somehow learned about the forest independently, her presence is a threat, one we need to understand better, Eliza insisted. If Primrose Industries has taken an interest in Blackwood Hollow, there must be records, documentation. We need to find out what they know and how they know it. I can search for them, Theo offered. Corporate filings, scientific publications, patent applications. There should be a paper trail. And I'll discreetly ask around town, Gabriel added. See if she's approached anyone else, made any offers. In the meantime, we need to accelerate our research, Eliza said. If the first failed is making moves outside the forest, time might be shorter than we thought. As the others discussed next steps, Eliza found herself drawn to the window, looking out toward the forest edge, visible in the distance. The trees stood unnaturally still, as if listening. For the first time since becoming a keeper, she felt caught in a web of conflicting loyalties and uncertain truths. The first growth spoke of balance and protection, while the first failed represented exploitation and vengeance. Or so they were told. But what if those roles were more complicated? What if the truth lay somewhere in the contested space between? The wooden key in her pocket seemed to respond to her doubts, growing neither warm in warning nor cool in comfort, but pulsing with a steady rhythm that matched her heartbeat, a reminder that she was connected to something larger than herself, something that transcended simple categories of ally and enemy, good and evil. Whatever came next, the keepers would need to navigate it together, testing each revelation against their own experiences, their own developing abilities. They had begun as strangers, brought together by mysterious forces. Now they needed to become something more, a unified front against threats from both beyond the boundary and within the human world that sought to breach it. As the sun set over Blackwood Hollow, casting the forest in shadow, Eliza made a silent promise to herself and to the others. They would uncover the truth about the first growth and the first failed, about the boundary and the pact it represented. And when they did, they would make their own informed choice about where their loyalties should lie, not as pawns in an ancient conflict, but as conscious participants in shaping the relationship between worlds, The wooden key warmed in response, as if acknowledging her resolution. Whether in approval or warning, Eliza couldn't tell. But she took comfort in knowing that at least one thing was certain. In a landscape of shifting truths and veiled motives, the five keepers had each other. And for now, that would have to be enough. 3 days before the winter solstice, Blackwood Hollow disappeared from maps. Sophia discovered this first while attempting to guide a colleague from her former university to town. The visiting botanist called in confusion, saying his GPS kept rerouting him in circles, and every digital map showed only uninterrupted forest where the town should be. By midday, deliveries had stopped arriving. The postal carrier never showed. And when River tried calling out, they found all signals dead, phones, internet, radio, as if the town had been neatly excised from the modern world. "It's beginning," Gabriel said grimly as the five keepers gathered in the town square where bewildered residents clustered in small groups, sharing increasingly wild theories about technical glitches and government conspiracies. "The boundary is failing," Theo agreed, his book warm against his chest, pages filled with urgent new text that appeared faster than he could read it. But is it pushing out or being pulled down? In the 2 weeks since their confrontation with Veronica Ellis and their discovery of Primrose Industries' interest in the forest, the keepers had been working tirelessly. Their research had yielded disturbing insights, fragments of truth scattered across disciplines and traditions that, when assembled, revealed a pattern none of them had anticipated. "The townspeople need reassurance," Eliza said, watching as Mayor Collins attempted to calm an increasingly agitated crowd. "They don't understand what's happening." "And we do," Sophia challenged, though her tone lacked its usual skepticism. Recent events had worn down her scientific resistance to the supernatural nature of their situation. "We're still operating on theories and half-truths. We know more than they do," River countered gently, "and we have responsibilities as keepers." The wooden key in Eliza's pocket pulsed with unusual warmth, not the warning heat she'd come to recognize, but something different, a summoning. She withdrew it, finding it glowing with a soft golden light that seemed to point toward the forest edge. "Something's calling us," she announced quietly to the others, as if in response their artifacts activated simultaneously, Theo's book flipping rapidly to a page depicting the heart chamber, Sophia's vial of soil beginning to sprout tiny, luminous seedlings, River's compass spinning wildly before settling toward the forest, and Gabriel's knife emitting a faint keening sound. "The solstice is still days away," Gabriel noted with concern. "The boundary shouldn't need renewal yet, unless the schedule has changed," Theo suggested. "Remember what we discovered about the original pact?" Their research had uncovered a revelation none of them had expected. The boundary between worlds wasn't merely metaphysical, it was tied to astronomical cycles. The equinoxes and solstices marked moments when the physical world's position, relative to celestial bodies, created natural windows between realms. The ritual didn't create the boundary, it reinforced it during these vulnerable periods. Solar eclipses, Sophia remembered. The original text mentioned them as moments of greatest vulnerability. River's eyes widened. "There's a partial eclipse tomorrow morning. I read about it last week." "That can't be a coincidence," Eliza said. "The first failed must know." "As does Primrose Industries," Gabriel interrupted, pointing across the square, where a convoy of sleek black vehicles was pulling in, led by a familiar figure. Veronica Ellis had returned, now accompanied by a team wearing the distinctive green triangle logo of Primrose. They moved with purpose, setting up equipment that resembled scientific instruments, but featured unusual modifications, crystal components, strange organic appendages that seemed almost alive. "They're using hybrid technology," Sophia observed, professional interest momentarily overriding her alarm. combining conventional sensors with something else. Components that can detect the green world's patterns, Theo guessed. They're mapping the boundary. For weaknesses, Gabriel concluded darkly. Eliza felt a surge of protective instinct, not just for the forest, but for the town caught unknowingly between powerful forces. We need to find out what they're planning before we head to the heart chamber. And we need to warn the first growth about the eclipse, River added, if it doesn't already know. Split up, Eliza decided. River and Theo head to the forest. Your artifacts are best suited to navigate straight to the heart. Tell the first growth about the eclipse and Primrose's arrival. Sophia and I will monitor Primrose's activities, Gabriel offered. My grandmother had survey equipment in her attic. We might be able to intercept whatever data they're gathering. And you, Sophia asked Eliza. Eliza's gaze drifted to Mayor Collins, who was now engaged in tense conversation with Veronica. I'll find out what they're telling the townspeople. The key might help me access conversations I'm not supposed to hear. They separated with quiet urgency, each heading to their assigned tasks. As Eliza approached the town hall where Veronica had escorted the mayor, she felt the wooden key growing, warm against her palm. It had evolved beyond mere wood in recent weeks, developing intricate grain patterns that shifted and changed like living tissue, responding to her developing abilities. Understanding thresholds had become second nature to Eliza. Doors, yes, but also transitions of all kinds, between spaces, between states, between realities. She had discovered she could ease herself through boundaries others couldn't even perceive, stepping sideways into liminal spaces where she could observe without being observed. Now she stood before the town hall's solid oak doors, closed and guarded by 2 Primrose security personnel. Clutching the key, she focused not on the physical barrier, but on the conceptual threshold between public and private space. The key pulsed once, and Eliza felt reality shift around her. She didn't pass through the door so much as slip between the moments of its existence, between the particles that comprised it, through the quantum possibilities of its location. One instant, she stood outside, the next within, having navigated a threshold no ordinary human could perceive. Inside, Veronica Ellis stood before a digital display, presenting to Mayor Collins and the town council. The image showed Blackwood Hollow from above, not a conventional satellite image, but something more complex, with colourful overlays highlighting energy patterns that pulsed and flowed. Natural resource unlike any other, Veronica was saying, her voice carrying the smooth confidence of someone accustomed to getting her way. A unique energy signature that our researchers believe could revolutionize sustainable power generation, medical treatments, even agricultural technologies. And you're saying this energy comes from our forest? Mayor Collins asked, clearly, skeptical despite his obvious interest. Not just from it, Veronica corrected with a predatory smile. It is the forest, in a sense, a fundamental pattern that underpins the local ecosystem. Something ancient and powerful that has been contained. A council member leaned forward. Contained by what? That's the fascinating part, Veronica replied, changing the display to show 5 distinct energy signatures moving through town, signatures Eliza recognized with a chill as herself and the other keepers. By them, 5 individuals who serve as living anchors for a boundary that has kept this energy from being properly utilized. You're talking about our citizens, the mayor objected. People who live here. Most arrived quite recently, Veronica countered. And they're not entirely human anymore. Murmurs of alarm spread through the council. Eliza tensed, prepared to reveal herself if necessary. What exactly are you proposing? The mayor asked warily. Primrose Industries would like to acquire Extraction rights to this energy, Veronica stated plainly. We have the technology to access it safely without the archaic ritual maintenance these five have been conducting. And what would this mean for Blackwood Hollow? Veronica's smile widened. Prosperity, jobs, infrastructure. Your town would become the headquarters for the most revolutionary energy company on the planet. The economic impact would be substantial. She named a figure that made the council members' eyes widen. And if we decline? The mayor pressed. To his credit, Veronica's expression hardened slightly. This energy exists whether you acknowledge it or not. The boundary containing it is failing. That's why your town has vanished from maps, why your communications are down. Tomorrow's eclipse will weaken it further. Without intervention, Blackwood Hollow may simply cease to exist as part of this reality. That's absurd, a council member scoffed. Is it? Veronica challenged. Haven't you always known there was something unusual about your forest? Haven't generations of townspeople avoided it after dark, told stories of its strangeness? The truth has been before you all along, maintained by keepers whose families have served this function for centuries. The mention of generations caught the mayor's attention. Keepers, like young Mr. Morgan, Veronica said, his grandmother before him, and now 4 newcomers who arrived on the autumn equinox. They maintain a boundary that was established by the original settlers, a boundary that's now failing and threatening your town's very existence. Eliza had heard enough. Slipping back through the threshold of reality, she emerged outside the town hall and hurried toward Sophia and Gabriel's position on the edge of the square. They know everything, she reported breathlessly. About us, about the boundary. They're positioning themselves as saviors who can stabilize the energy while exploiting it commercially. They can't possibly understand what they're dealing with, Sophia said, adjusting a device that appeared to be intercepting Primrose's sensor data. The patterns they're measuring are just the surface. What are you seeing? Eliza asked, peering at Sophia's makeshift monitor. They've mapped the energy flow between the forest and the town, Gabriel explained. They can see how it's changing, intensifying as the eclipse approaches. But they're misinterpreting it, Sophia added. They think it's a resource to be extracted, like oil or natural gas. They don't understand it's conscious. Or perhaps they do, Gabriel said grimly. Look at this. He pointed to a schematic on the screen, a device unlike anything Eliza had seen before, part machine, part organic matter. Its purpose was unclear, but its design incorporated elements that eerily resembled their artifacts, particularly Eliza's key. They're building something to breach the boundary artificially, Sophia realized. Not just to extract energy, but to create a permanent opening they can control. A synthetic key, Eliza whispered, feeling her wooden key pulse in response. But how? How could they know enough to create something like this? The first failed, Gabriel suggested. It must have been communicating with them somehow, sharing knowledge. A distant rumble shook the ground beneath their feet. Toward the forest, clouds were gathering unnaturally fast, swirling in patterns too deliberate to be natural weather. The boundary is destabilizing ahead of the eclipse, Sophia said, checking her sensors. The energy patterns are fluctuating wildly. River and Theo should have reached the heart chamber by now, Gabriel noted, concern evident in his voice. If summoned by his words, River appeared at the edge of the square, running toward them with desperate speed. Alone. The forest is changing, they gasped upon reaching the group. Pathways shifting, trees moving. I lost Theo about halfway in. The compass didn't help, Eliza asked, alarmed. River shook their head. Something's interfering with it. The needle kept spinning between 2 points, as if there were suddenly 2 heart chambers. The first failed, Gabriel guessed, creating a false destination to separate you. Or the first growth, Sophia countered. We still don't know which. Entity to trust. Theo has the book, Eliza reminded them. He has access to knowledge we don't. He might find his way, or be led exactly where the first failed wants him, Gabriel said darkly. Another tremor shook the town, stronger this time. Across the square, Primrose technicians scrambled to secure their equipment as the ground undulated beneath them. Veronica emerged from the town hall, speaking urgently into a communication device. We need to get to the heart chamber, Eliza decided. All of us together. Whatever's happening, the ritual must be performed before the eclipse tomorrow. But Theo, River began. We'll find him on the way, Eliza assured them. The key can open paths that shouldn't exist. If he's in the forest, I'll find him. They gathered their artifacts and supplies, knowing they might not return to town before the coming confrontation reached its climax. As they prepared to leave, Mayor Collins approached them, his expression a mixture of suspicion and concern. Ms. Ellis says, "You four are responsible for what's happening to our town," he said without preamble, "that you've been performing some kind of ritual in the forest. That's now failing. It's more complicated than that," Eliza replied carefully. "But yes, we are connected to the forest in ways others aren't." "She says Primrose can fix whatever's going wrong," the mayor continued, "that they have technology to stabilize the situation permanently without relying on rituals." "And did she mention what they want in return?" Gabriel asked. The mayor hesitated. "Access to the forest's energy. They say it could transform the global economy, make Blackwood Hollow the center of a new industry." "Mayor Collins," Eliza said gently, "that energy isn't just a resource, it's alive, conscious. What they're proposing isn't extraction, it's vivisection, and the consequences won't be limited to our town." "Then explain to me what's really happening," he demanded. "No more secrets." The four keepers exchanged glances, silently debating how much to reveal. Finally, Sophia stepped forward, her scientific background lending credibility to her words. "The forest contains a boundary between our world and what you might call a parallel reality, a green world that exists alongside our own, but operates by different rules. That boundary weakens at certain astronomical alignments, like tomorrow's eclipse. Without the ritual to strengthen it, the two worlds begin to bleed into each other. Which is why the town is vanishing from maps," Gabriel added. "It's being caught between realities." "And Primrose?" the mayor asked. "They want to exploit the boundary," River explained, "to harvest the green world's energy for profit. But doing so would destabilize both realities in ways they can't possibly comprehend. So our choice is between your ritual and their technology." "It's not about technology versus tradition," Eliza clarified. "It's about understanding versus exploitation. The ritual works with the natural order of both worlds. What Primrose proposes would violate that order." The mayor studied them for a long moment. Gabriel's grandmother was respected in this town. If she believed in this boundary, this ritual... He sighed heavily. "What do you need from us?" "Keep Primrose occupied," Gabriel said. "Delay any action they try to take until after the eclipse. Tomorrow morning, we'll handle the rest." "And if you fail?" Eliza met his eyes steadily. "Then it won't matter what Primrose does. The boundary will collapse, and Blackwood Hollow will either cease to exist in this reality or become something no one, not us, not Primrose, can control." With that sobering assessment hanging in the air, the four keepers turned toward the forest. The trees at its edge seemed to lean toward them, branches reaching out like grasping hands. The very air shimmered with energy made visible by the approaching celestial alignment. As they stepped under the canopy, Eliza felt the wooden key grow warm in her hand, responding to the charged atmosphere. Behind them, Blackwood Hollow seemed to waver like a mirage, buildings flickering between solid reality and translucent possibility. Ahead, the forest had transformed from the relatively ordered woodland they knew into something wilder, more primeval. Trees of impossible size and species stood alongside familiar oaks and maples, as if multiple forests from different times and places were overlapping. "The boundaries between worlds are thinning," River observed, compass spinning erratically in their hand. "Not just at the heart chamber, but everywhere." "Can you find the way?" Gabriel asked Eliza. She held up the key, focusing on the heart chamber and on Theo. For a moment, nothing happened. Then suddenly, the key projected a golden thread of light that wound between the trees, beckoning them forward. "This way," Eliza said, following the thread. "And hurry. I think we're running out of time." As they moved deeper into the forest, the overlay of realities became more pronounced. Flowers bloomed and withered in seconds beneath their feet. Creatures that shouldn't exist darted between trunks, things with too many limbs, bodies that seemed partly plant and partly animal. The boundary wasn't just failing, it was shattering, creating pockets where the green world pushed through into their reality with increasing force. "If this is happening throughout the forest," Sophia reasoned as they hurried along Eliza's golden thread, "the effect must be even stronger at the heart chamber. And tomorrow's eclipse will amplify it further," Gabriel added grimly. "Perfect. Conditions for whatever Primrose is planning," River concluded. They rounded a massive tree trunk and stopped short. Before them stood not one house, but two, overlapping yet distinct, like double-exposed photographs. One was the familiar structure they had entered before, grown from living trees. The other was darker, older, its roots reaching up rather than down, its branches plunging into the earth like strange tentacles. "Two houses," Eliza whispered, "two hearts." Two entities, Gabriel realized. The first growth and the first failed, each with their own chamber now. The golden thread from Eliza's key split, one strand leading to each house. "Which one holds Theo?" River asked anxiously. Before Eliza could answer, both houses shuddered, their structures rippling as if caught in some temporal distortion. From within each came a sound, not quite a voice, not quite a roar, but something between that echoed through the forest with palpable force. And in that moment, Eliza understood with perfect clarity what they were witnessing. Not two separate entities locked in ancient conflict, but a single consciousness that had been torn in two by the original boundary. One half contained and evolved within the heart chamber, the other fragmented and bitter, pushing back against its confinement. The first growth and the first failed were not enemies. They were broken halves of the same being, each incomplete without the other, each believing itself to be the true expression of the green world's will. "We've been manipulated," she said aloud, "by both sides. The boundary didn't just separate worlds, it split the consciousness that existed between them." The others looked at her in shock, but before they could respond, a figure emerged from the dark, inverted house. Theo, his expression dazed, the bark-bound book clutched tightly to his chest. "Theo!" River called, starting forward. He raised a hand in warning. "Don't, it's not safe. I know now." He struggled to form coherent thoughts. "The book showed me everything, the original deception, the true purpose of the Keepers." "Which is?" Sophia prompted. "Not to maintain the boundary," Theo said, his voice steadying as he approached them, "but to eventually heal it, to reunite what was sundered. That's the final ritual, the one no generation of Keepers has been ready to perform, until now." The ground beneath them trembled more violently, and both houses seemed to flicker in and out of existence. The forest around them was transforming rapidly now, reality itself becoming fluid as the eclipse drew nearer. The solstice and the eclipse together, Gabriel realized. A convergence that happens only once every few centuries. "The moment when reunion becomes possible," Theo confirmed. "But what about Primrose?" Sophia asked practically. "They're planning to exploit the boundary's weakness." "They're pawns," Theo said dismissively, influenced by fragments of the first failed consciousness, but ultimately irrelevant to what must happen now. Eliza studied her friend carefully, noting subtle changes in his demeanor and speech patterns. "Theo, did something happen to you in there?" He met her gaze, and for a moment Eliza glimpsed something ancient behind his eyes, a consciousness, vastly older than human. "I understand now," he said simply, "and soon you will too." The key in Eliza's hand pulsed urgently, neither warning nor welcoming, but something else entirely, a call to action, to decision. The moment of convergence approached, and with it a choice that would determine the fate of both worlds. And as the forest continued to transform around them, reality bending towards some new configuration, the five keepers stood at the threshold of revelation, about to discover whether their purpose was truly to maintain the ancient boundary or to finally heal the rift that had divided not just words, but the consciousness that existed between them. The eclipse began at dawn. As the moon's shadow crept across the sun, reality in Blackwood Hollow grew increasingly unstable. The town itself flickered like a faulty projection, buildings momentarily transparent, streets overlaid with wild undergrowth that appeared and vanished in pulsing waves. Townsfolk huddled in the square, watching the sky with fearful fascination, while Primrose technicians frantically adjusted their equipment. In the forest, at the threshold between two mirrored heart chambers, the five keepers stood united once more, their artifacts glowing with unprecedented intensity. "We need to decide," Eliza said, the wooden key hovering above her palm, no longer bound by normal physics. "Maintain the boundary as we've been taught, or attempt the reunion ritual," Theo discovered. "If we choose wrong, both worlds could be destroyed," Gabriel warned, his knife humming with potential energy. "The chaos we're seeing now would be nothing compared to complete collapse." "Or complete harmony," Theo countered, the book in his hands opening and closing of its own accord, pages riffling as if caught in a spectral wind. "The book showed me visions of what could be, a world neither fully human nor fully green, but a conscious integration of both. The first growth and the first failed each want reunion," River added, their compass spinning continuously now. "But on their own terms, with their own consciousness dominant, which means neither can be trusted to guide us," Sophia concluded. The soil in her vial had transformed into a swirling microcosm of constantly evolving plant matter. "We need to find our own path." The eclipse deepened, the forest darkening as solar light diminished. Both heart chambers pulsed in synchrony now, their structures bleeding into one another. "We're running out of time," Gabriel urged. "Primrose will make their move at totality." As if confirming his words, a mechanized hum rose from the direction of town, the activation of whatever device Primrose had constructed to breach the boundary artificially. "They don't understand what they're doing," Sophia said. "Their technology can tear the boundary, but not in a controlled way. It would be like performing surgery with explosives." Eliza felt the weight of decision pressing upon her. As keykeeper, thresholds were her domain. Whatever they chose, she would be instrumental in its execution. "We became keepers without fully understanding what we were agreeing to," she said slowly. "But we've learned. We've grown. Our artifacts chose us for a reason." She looked at each of her companions, these former strangers who had become something closer than friends, bound by a shared purpose and transformation. "I think we need to trust that. Trust ourselves. Not the first growth or the first failed, not Primrose's technology or ancient traditions, but our own understanding of balance." "A third path," Theo realized, his eyes lighting with comprehension. "Neither maintenance nor simple reunion, but something new. Guided integration," Sophia suggested, "scientific precision finding expression in mystical context, controlled reconnection that preserves the best of both worlds." With us as the mediators, River added, standing at the boundary not as guardians or destroyers, but as translators. Gabriel nodded slowly, his initial caution giving way to certainty. The knife doesn't just sever, it can also join when the cut is precise and intentional. As the eclipse approached totality, the two heart chambers began to merge more completely, creating a structure that was neither one nor the other, but something unprecedented. A house that existed in multiple states simultaneously, its architecture following patterns beyond ordinary geometry. We need to enter together, Eliza decided, carrying our understanding of both worlds. They moved forward as one, crossing the threshold into a space that defied conventional physics. Inside, the chamber had expanded infinitely. The great tree at its center now a dual entity, roots growing upward and downward simultaneously, branches extending in all directions through dimensions that shouldn't exist. Within this impossible tree stood two figures, the familiar entity of the first growth and its counterpart, the first failed. No longer separated by bark and boundary, they faced each other across a diminishing gap, like reflections slowly reaching for one another. Keepers, they spoke in unison, their voices overlapping in harmonies and discords. You have come to witness the reunion. We've come to guide it, Eliza corrected, stepping forward with the key held high, not as servants to either side, but as stewards of both worlds. The boundary was never meant to be permanent, Theo added, the book opening to reveal pages now filled with a new script, not records of the past, but possibilities for the future. But neither was it meant to be simply dissolved. Your separation has created imbalance, Sophia continued, her vial of soil now containing miniature versions of both heart chambers, demonstrating through living metaphor what they proposed, not just between worlds, but within each. The human world has lost its connection to the green, becoming exploitative and unrooted. The green world has grown isolated and rigid, forgetting that change and evolution are part of its nature. We offer neither continuation nor revolution, River said, their compass now emitting a light that created pathways throughout the chamber, connections between seemingly disparate points. But evolution, guided integration that preserves distinctness while allowing exchange. A new pact, Gabriel concluded, his knife glowing along its edge. Not between adversaries, but between aspects of a greater whole. The two entities regarded them with ancient, unreadable expressions. You presume much, young keepers, they said, again in that unsettling unison. What gives you the right to determine our fate? Our humanity and our connection to the green world, Eliza answered simply. We stand in both realities now, transformed by the very boundary we're discussing. We represent the possibility of integration without loss of identity. As the eclipse reached totality outside, plunging the chamber into deeper shadow, a tremor ran through the entire structure. From the direction of town came a surge of energy, Primrose activating their technology, attempting to tear open the boundary for their own purposes. We must act now, Theo urged. Together. The five keepers formed a circle between the two entities, their artifacts connecting in a web of light that stabilized the shuddering chamber. Drawing on their evolved abilities, they began the new ritual, not the maintenance they had performed before, nor the reunion the entities expected, but something uniquely their own. Eliza used the key to create not a barrier, but a regulated passage, a controlled threshold that would allow exchange without collapse. Theo's book captured and translated the patterns of both consciousness, creating a shared language for their communication. Sophia's soil provided the foundation, the literal and metaphorical ground where integration could take root. River's compass established paths of connection that respected the integrity of both worlds. and Gabriel's knife made precise incisions in reality itself, allowing healing to occur along natural seams rather than forced fractures. As their ritual reached its climax, the two entities began to shift, not merging completely, but entering. A state of dynamic balance, connected yet distinct, like the dual nature of light as both particle and wave. The chamber expanded outward, incorporating the artificial breach Primrose had created, transforming their crude technology into another regulated threshold, one that would demonstrate the green world's patterns without allowing exploitation or dominance. When the eclipse passed totality, sunlight gradually returning to the forest, the heart chamber had transformed. No longer a house, it had become a grove, a sacred space where the boundary existed not as a wall, but as a permeable membrane, allowing conscious exchange between worlds while preserving their essential natures. The 5 keepers stood changed as well. Their artifacts had evolved once more, now integrated more completely with their beings. Eliza's key a part of her very bones, Theo's book inscribed within his mind, Sophia's soil flowing through her veins, River's compass embedded in their perception, Gabriel's knife an extension of his will. It is done. The unified consciousness that had once been the first growth and first failed acknowledged. Not as we intended, but perhaps as it should be. What happens now? Eliza asked, feeling the new pattern settling around them, reality, stabilizing into its evolved configuration. Now you truly begin your work as keepers, the consciousness replied, not as guardians of separation, but as facilitators of exchange. The green world's wisdom flows once more into human awareness. Human creativity enters the green consciousness. Neither dominates. Both transform. As they emerged from the grove, the forest around them had settled into a new state, still recognizably a forest, but more vibrant, more aware. Trees that had once merely sensed now communicated openly. Plants that had been manipulated by competing consciousnesses now grew according to their own nature, yet in greater harmony with their surroundings. Blackwood Hollow itself had stabilized, no longer flickering between realities, but existing as a junction point, a community where the human world and the green world overlapped more completely than anywhere else on Earth. And in the town square, the Primrose team stood bewildered, as their equipment displayed readings they couldn't comprehend, data that showed them glimpses of the green world's patterns, but refused to be captured or exploited. They'll either leave in frustration or stay to learn, Sophia observed, as the 5 keepers watched from the forest edge. Either way, they can't take what isn't freely given anymore, Theo said with satisfaction. Eliza felt the new reality settling around them like a comfortable garment, neither entirely human nor entirely other, but a conscious integration that honored both. The role they had accepted at the autumn equinox had transformed, as had they themselves. No longer mere guardians of an arbitrary boundary, they had become translators between worlds, facilitators of exchange, stewards of evolution. As the citizens of Blackwood Hollow emerged from their shelters, looking around in wonder at a town subtly changed, buildings partially embraced by living plants, streets lined with flowers that responded to human presence, the very air charged with green awareness, Eliza knew their work was just beginning. The forgotten keepers had remembered their true purpose. And in doing so, they had helped both worlds remember something long forgotten. That separation was never the goal, but conscious communion. In the heart of the forest, the grove pulsed with new life, and throughout Blackwood Hollow, the first tendrils of a new awareness began to spread, not as an invasion, not as exploitation, but as an invitation to remember what it meant to be truly alive in a world where nothing was ever truly separate, only temporarily forgotten. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out, and don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.